Hi everyone, I'm back again with another new guest, Kathy, with me. Hi Kathy, how are you doing?
Hi, Anurag. I'm doing great. Thank you.
I'm doing great, Kathy. Thank you. So who's Kathy? Firstly, Kathy is the Chief Experience and Operations Officer of GreenState Credit Union, one of the largest credit unions in the country, as we all know. So she has a very interesting journey, and the reason we gel so well, both of us somehow started our careers very similarly. She's been a management started her career being a management consultant with PwC almost 3 decades back. Gradually making a move to financial services, then she joined Schwab and held a leadership role at Northern Trust for more than a decade. Right, she had a broad arena that she covered, starting with asset servicing, management, and she moved out of Northern Trust. Her last role at Northern Trust was a CEO of the Canadian business uh, before she finally decided to move into the credit union ecosystem. And we're glad, Kev, to have you in the ecosystem over here.
Thank you. Me too. I found my home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she drives a bunch of things like GreenState, right? I mean, she got elevated to a new role a few days back. Right now, she runs all retail branches, digital transformation, contact centers, core operations. Uh, Plus, she's building a new member experience team. So anyone who's looking for a new job, hit her up. She's building a new team over there. And apart from that, almost anything under the sun, right? She also helps strategic M&As, investments, strategic initiatives, broadly bunch of new roles, right? Kathy, I hope I'll be able to cover at least 50% of your introduction. If I missed out anything, please feel free to go and add it.
Oh, that's perfect. That's good.
Okay, at least I'm confident that I've done a decent enough job. So, Kathy, first question, right? You've got such a varied experience, cross-functional, cross-geographical, consulting, banks, credit unions. So, what keeps you going?
Yeah, great question. So, for me, and I kind of mentioned it before when we were chatting, but I've really found my home in the credit union industry. I feel like it is the right match of head and heart for me. And, the fact that we are member owned cooperatives and it's all about doing what's best for the member, not necessarily, sometimes it's decisions that aren't best for the bottom line, but it's best for the member and it's the right thing to do. And helping improve, our number one goal is helping improve financial wellness for our members and, really making a meaningful impact in the communities that we serve. So that purpose to me keeps me going. All the people that I get the pleasure of working with every single day, people are the most important thing at any organization. And the individuals at Green State and the culture we have here is absolutely incredible. So I get to work with, the 950 employees, and all of us have that same member-centric heart in us, and that purpose that we all share, and that keeps me going. Being able to make an impact in people's lives and the communities that we operate.
And that's a classic example of being driven into the ecosystem. I mean, you actually mean it, and hence you're doing it, right? That's so special. Um, Follow-up question to that, Kathy. I mean, again, hopping onto the fact you started on a career as a management consultant, moving to again, banking, to the creative ecosystem. We would love to know your journey because it's not a very common journey that I've seen. I know of maybe 100 people who move from being a teller to becoming a C-level, but your journey is very different. I would love to know more about it.
Sure. Yeah. I feel very fortunate in everything I've gotten the opportunity to do, and excited about, what's coming next and, where I'm at now and everything. But I, gosh, my journey could take hours because I feel like I've done a lot of
Yeah,
different things.
yeah,
But I was born in a very small town in Iowa, daughter of a cattle farmer. And so that, community roots and taking care of your neighbors and doing what's right is kind of ingrained in just who I am, as well as that Midwest, work ethic is there. And first generation college graduate, my parents, made a priority, education a priority, and that, I give them thanks every day. They are the reason that I, got to do everything I've been able to do, and I am where I am, and able to, again, make that impact and really, try to live my purpose that I talked about before. I did undergrad, University of Iowa, Graduated there and did management consulting, as you said, with PwC. And that gave me a grounding in just being able to see a lot of different companies, the cultures, how they operate, being able to dive in, understand a business, and talk with both the senior executives to the people doing the actual work, on the ground. And so being able to step into anything, new roles, new jobs, and quickly figure it out and make a difference, and how to work basically is kind of that foundation. And through that time at PwC, I did a lot of, strategy projects. Back in the day, it was data warehousing and business intelligence. Now it's a lot of big data type stuff. But that's kind of in my core too, because that was where I started. But through that time, I really found myself, I was a finance major in undergrad, but really found myself drawn to financial services. And so I started, I did projects across all industries, but really found my calling, in financial services industries and doing engagements for them. 5 years in, I got tired of being on an airplane, and I was living in the Bay Area, and Charles Schwab, had some openings. It was a fantastic culture again. Chuck Schwab was the CEO when I was there, and what I found amazing is no matter what your role was at the organization, he found a way to connect that back to Schwab's clients and what that role did, how it made an impact at the end of the day with the clients. And that's really stuck with me. Schwab is also a tech forward, innovative organization, and I love that too. It's blending that business and technology, and figuring out ways to utilize technology and innovation to do what we need to do better. So that kind of struck me there. And it was an incredibly diverse organization, so that really resonated with me as well. I was there at Schwab for about 5 years, and then Northern Trust called me out of the blue, and they had an opening in Chicago, and to be honest, I had never even heard of Northern Trust at that time, but I got to know it, and saw that it was global and had a very strong brand and reputation, very large organization. And so I made the move back to the Midwest, from California, worked for them in Chicago for a couple years, and then moved overseas with them. So moved to London, lived in London for 2 years, and worked across Europe. And then a new role opened up in Singapore, and so I moved to Singapore, and then worked across Asia Pacific for about 5 years. During that time, I also got my MBA with University of Chicago. So I used to fly. They have a campus in Hong Kong. I used to fly to Hong Kong to go to school, which was great, and did that for about 5 years. Living out of Singapore, but working anywhere from Korea, down to New Zealand, across to India. So Asia Pacific, as you well know, is a very big region with lots of just, nuances. Every country is different. Every culture is different. And so it was just like, I'm an intellectually curious person, and that was just food for my soul in figuring out, how to bring diverse groups together and how to operate effectively with such, vast diversity in every aspect that you can imagine it. And then my son lived with us when we were in Singapore. And so when he graduated from high school, I was never going to move him in the middle of high school. So when he graduated from high school, my husband and I were ready to move back to the U.S. And then that's when I moved back with Northern Trust back to Chicago and started working with Jason Tyler, one of my prior bosses, who I still think very fondly of. He's still at Northern, but worked with him as his right hand running the institutional asset management business. And so that was flipping to the other side of Northern Trust, which was great. Did that for a few years out of Chicago, and then Jason said, hey, would you be interested in running Canada? And I said, you know what, I'm ready to move back to my home state. I've been away, overseas for nearly 8 years and kind of, lived all over the U.S. But I said, I'll do it temporarily. And so my last stint was there in Canada, working with the team there and really helping find a new leader because the prior one had retired. So helping find a new leader and have that smooth handoff. And then I started meeting with, the bank CEOs and credit union CEOs in the state of Iowa, and got to know GreenState and just kind of stopped talking to anybody else because it just fit with me. And I've now been at GreenState about 6.5 years. And as I said before, it's really, truly my home. I feel like I've got that match of head and heart. I feel very fortunate for having all of the experience working for larger organizations. I can bring that to, the credit union, helping it scale. It's been from when I joined, it was 5 billion and 500 employees. Now it's, excuse me, now it's 11 billion and 950 employees. So kind of running different functions and helping scale the business. But at the same time, the credit union industry and that member centricity and doing what's right and making a meaningful impact, it works, and I love it. So here I am.
It's fantastic, Kathy. I mean, it's amazing to hear your journey, right? I think you're the only guest with whom I can compete with number of cities and number of countries stated.
Yes. And then just to top it off, my husband, I picked up a Colombian husband along the way. So I met my husband in San Francisco as an Iowan and Colombian do. But but he was born in Colombia, so Spanish is his first language, and so he's now, Iowa by marriage with me, but he loves it.
This is such a varied experience. I mean, literally, it's very rare to find someone with so much of a breadth of an experience. And now, I think the creative union ecosystem is fortunate to have people like you, Kathy, who get. I mean, I'm very serious with who actually get the outside perspective. I mean, it's more of looking outward and then inward, and not just looking inward, because that's what is needed right now to make the movement success going forward. But this was great. I think it's amazing. Uh, Following up from the last question, obviously, you are a very different role out there at Northern Trust. You're a leadership role in Northern Trust. So what made you make a move to the creative and ecosystem? I mean, I know that you wanted to move to your home state, but is there anything else specifically?
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't know much about it.
Same here.
And so I stumbled upon it, and I'm so happy that I did, because I will never leave it now that I found it. And so, there's days where I wish I would have found it much earlier in my career. Definitely as a member, I could have earned a lot more money in my deposits and had better loan rates had I known about credit unions before. But, just as a leader, some days I wondered, hey, it would have been nice to find this earlier. But at the same time, I don't think I would have gotten those experiences and, again, been able to bring more of that outside view, as you mentioned. And, in Asia, banking is way ahead of the U.S. And so I also feel fortunate to kind of have that experience. Feel like I've developed incredible range of being able to just connect with people from no matter where they were or where they are, and so I think that serves me well as a leader as well. And that's also a little bit of the credit union philosophy. We're here for all people, not just kind of one type of individual. So that fits with me too.
Exactly. I think this is been ingrained to you from the day one, because again, switching multiple clients, multiple engagements in the initial days makes you so much agile that you fit into any role possible. So in Northern Trust itself, you've done like a zillion of roles, right? From there, moving on to a credit union, helping it transform, right? Because you're wearing multiple hats. That's really helpful, I think. Exactly. It's not very frequent that you find this aim of people helping people, and actually people mean by it, right? It's not some fancy term that's just used, but it's real, right?
ROA gets too high, we got to challenge that and say, hey, we're either not giving enough back to our members or we're not investing enough in the business. You don't find that in banking.
Never. It's only top line and bottom line. No one cares anything about else. Yep. Now, since Kathy, you've spent like years across Singapore, now then London, then also moving to Canada, you almost seen all the continents, right? I'm very sure you also worked out of Australia at some point of time. I don't know if you worked out of Australia.
I did work with people. I had part of my team was in Australia, and definitely several of the clients were in Australia.
So net you worked out of all the continents apart from Antarctica, I believe.
Correct, and not a lot in Africa either, actually. So still got that one to go.
I understand. My question is, because of exposure being across geographical and cross-functional, right? How has this helped you across your journey? Because for me, Kathy, I have an experience of almost a decade now. I thank my stars that I did consulting for the first 6 years of my life. Because same reason, cross-functional, cross-geographical, cross-vertical, cross-domain. So how has that helped you?
Yeah. I mentioned a little before, but that range, that being able to connect with individuals, regardless of their background or experiences, goes a long way. You know, finding common ground with people. The other thing, though, is just really, it has solidified my embracing of, diversity and inclusion and the power of having, a very, very diverse team. And that it's important to surround yourselves with people that have different backgrounds, that don't look like you, that have different experiences. And, there's nothing more powerful than a diverse group of individuals working towards a common goal. And so, finding ways to bring different people together and have them collaborate towards the same purpose is incredible. So I do feel, growing up, again, cattle farmer's daughter in a small town in Iowa, I wouldn't have had that unless I'd had these experiences. And then the other thing it really taught me is, and you probably know this too, having, made the move across different countries, when you move to a new country, you almost have to unlearn what you know to be true. And so all the kind of, norms and different things that you're used to or the way things work, you have to let that go and just kind of empty your cup and then just, listen a lot. Use your ears and mouth in proportion, listen and observe and really kind of, relearn, right? And that's a really, really transformative thing. My time overseas, I grew more professionally and personally than I did with any other experience that I had. And I feel really fortunate to have been able to do that.
Absolutely, that's very well said, Kathy. Um, Another very subtle question, and I think this is real, right? Uh, in financial services, there are not many female leaders, be in Northern Trust, be in GreenState, right? I won't talk about consulting because consulting still has some mix now. I won't complain, but definitely not in financial services. So, have you faced any challenges across the way, right? And how have you encountered them, and how have you, moved past the challenges?
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you're younger, uh, you don't understand some of the things that are happening as much. And so some of that just comes with kind of time and experience and, observing and, practice. But one thing I'll say is as I've, navigated through my career, I do make it a point. I look at the boards of every organization I'm going to work for. I look at the leadership teams.
Yes.
And if there isn't enough diversity in terms of, gender, ethnicity, you name it, I won't work there because I don't want to work in an organization that doesn't have that. And, double clicking a little bit more on that, if the only females are, running HR and marketing, so it makes a difference. And I know I'm not the only one that looks at that. It makes a difference and it matters. And so that's one thing I've strategically looked for and always will. And then, do my part. I feel like myself as an executive and a female executive is, help bring others up and be that ally for others, which leads me to kind of the next thing, big thing that I have experienced a lot is your voice sometimes isn't as heard around the table as others. And so you do have to find your allies. So I've, made a point to find, male allies that, hey, if I say something and it isn't heard, can you repeat it, for me or link back to it? And then doing the same for other individuals around the table, really listening to what people are trying to say or asking questions when you can tell they have something to say but are too shy to bring it forward. And, giving people that space to be heard and to have their voice heard is really, really important. So that is a big thing that, still happens to this day, not as much, but again, I feel like the role that I'm in today, it's my duty and my responsibility to continue to try to change that.
That's such a fantastic point made, Kathy, in terms of you don't join an organization if the organization does not have enough diversity in the board or in the leadership. I think all of us should start considering that diversity is just not on paper, but it should actually be practiced, right? It's not just hiring another female vice president because you have to hire a female vice president for the sake of it, but do it because it needs to be done. Right? That's the basic difference.
And then it has to be part weaved into the culture. That doesn't tell you everything, but that's a guiding point. If you see who's sitting in those roles on the board and the executive level. One thing I'm really proud of at GreenState, we do our employee engagement survey twice a year. Excuse me. We do our employee engagement survey twice a year, and some of our top scoring is on inclusivity and belonging. And we at the executive team level take incredible pride for that. So it's not just talk, we actually live it, and your employees can feel that. And when they feel comfortable and they feel like they are being included and that they belong, that just leads to everything else. So if you have highly engaged employees, you're gonna, have them taking great care of your members. You're gonna get new members. They're gonna have, great member experience, and then that's gonna drive your financial results. So you can't spend enough time on those important pillars of your culture enough because it drives everything else.
It's a basic principle. I mean, take care of your employees will take care of your members. That's basic, and that's what you follow. That's fantastic. Now, Kathy, since you've had that journey of growing GreenState almost 2x, more than 2x, right, over the last 6 years, you'll have a very unique view towards the ecosystem right now. This year, 2024 was a bit bumpy, but still rates are going down, but still not as was expected like in the last couple of years back. So I personally think that, lending will soften next year, next year should be a better year, right? In multiple perspectives. But what are your 2 cents on 2025? How do you think the next year will look like?
Yeah, sure. And we do, obviously, as most, community institutions do, look at interest rate risk and model out different scenarios, ALM scenarios, and decide what we're going to do. At GreenState, we've really modeled in our prediction. It's probably going to be another, 100 basis points drop in 2025. I personally think it's going to continue to decline, but it's going to go slowly. It's going to take time. It's going to take, several years. And so it's really then looking at how you're positioned from a deposits and loan perspective, looking at, what you're offering, making sure you're not doing longer duration, on the deposit side. And I agree with you. I think lending, we're going to see an uptick probably from the last, couple years where everyone has really pulled back. We are starting to see some of the stabilization on performance, credit quality, performance, specifically auto and credit cards, that has been increasing the past couple of years, and that's really stabilizing, which is great. Commercial side, we're all going to have to watch that. I think that's kind of the wild card. But overall, it's going to stabilize. It's not going to be this wild, 500 basis point increase in a very short period of time. We're not going to see that, on the downside. And so when the world outside your walls is not, moving quite as quickly, it's easier to kind of steer the ship internally. So it's going to be a good year. We also are to really taking this opportunity, we're over 11 billion now, and so continuing to invest in building out our talent in core areas and a lot of our core infrastructure and capabilities so that when things, really turn, we're ready and we're ready to roll. So that's really been our focus both this year and then going into next year.
That's a very strategic way of looking onto it, building in-house capabilities, because you cannot be outsourcing it for the rest of your life, right? Or build capabilities inside. That's amazing. Why don't you grab a bottle of water, Kathy? I mean, if you're okay.
Thank you.
Cool. One other hot and sexy topic that everyone talks about is AI, and I hate to talk about AI because, I mean, you started from doing BI, right? I mean, I talk about a journey from BI to AI. Same. I'm a data scientist. So, data, yeah. Let's talk about analytics. Let's talk about data science. No one talks about that, but everyone wants to talk about AI. But still, so I'll ask you a very cliched question, right? Now, you've seen data transformation engagements both as a consultant and as a banker, right? So you can essentially wear both the lenses of a consultant and of an industry. And AI has gathered like a lot of interest over the last 2 years, 3 years after, I would say, democratization of AI by OpenAI. So where do you think is AI moving forward, and how can credit unions take advantage of this ecosystem?
I think it's critical that we do, or we're going to lose out. I do think AI and just that, foundational technology, just like digital did a whole acceleration during COVID, AI is like another step up in terms of what this can unlock for value for our membership and efficiency within our operations, which in turn then goes back to benefit our members. The more efficient we are, the more we can give back. And so I think we have to, but also with anything new, you need to be mindful of the risks associated with it, and really make sure that we are being prudent stewards of our organizations. And so the way we're looking at it is really starting with more just internal only focus on utilizing AI. So one of the example of this is our internal knowledge base, for instance. That's an easy one. Huge efficiency gains right there. Another one is using it within our member feedback surveys, so NPS, and really using AI to then say, okay, what are those key what are the key trends and what are those key items that are either driving the score up or down, and then making sure we're doing something about it. So those are a few examples. We have plenty more, but really starting there. And then as we get more comfortable with it, you can move more towards the member facing side, but never want to be, never knowingly first is something that I say a lot. So we don't want to be the first in. We're just too big. We're too big right now, and it could be a negative impact, and we have to be careful around that. But big picture view, we all need to embrace it. If we don't, we're going to fall behind, and it really is transformative. And I get really excited about the opportunities that are to come over the next, say, 5 years with embracing this in different ways. The other thing you mentioned, though, is data, and so I do want to talk about that. We think about what are the areas that we want to focus the most on where we can be different. And there's so many fintechs out there, and we are never going to be Google or Apple and be able to hire, right, the development teams that they have, let alone maintain that. And there's some really great companies out there that are very innovative and working on solutions. And so for us, it's more about being able to plug and play with what's kind of the latest and greatest in those spaces. And so where we really want to, be strategic on, we've been building out our data science team, and it really is about, building out our EDW, or enterprise data warehouse, and our data science and, analytics capabilities, because that's where we can, be strong. That is where we can invest. That is where we can find the talent and do some really cool and amazing things in that space. So that's been a focus area as well. I get very excited about it. As you can tell, that is where I started in my journey, and it's just really cool, the things that we can do there. So
I think it's one of the rarest discussions, Kathy, that someone talked about the term data science.
Here we go. Yep.
Yes.
I know. It's AI or it's digital, and you say it about 15 times in every single conversation that you have.
It's so much struggle to talk about how much data warehouse is important, even do basic dashboard rationalization. And then let's take data-driven decisioning, and then AI is maybe 5 years from now, right? Let's implement step by steps.
Yeah, and your data, and making sure you have clean data and you have your data organized a way that you can utilize it. I mean, it's like the blood in your body. Like it is everything. It is everything. So you can't spend enough time really trying to figure out the right approach there.
Exactly. So I think all credit union execs will love this part. I'll just cut it as a small clip and post it out for everyone. And you can talk to Kathy because she has experience in data warehousing and analytics. Amazing. So Kathy, one question piggybacking from data science, whatever you call data science, AI-driven transformation. Now, credit unions, okay. So one quick question. The large credit unions of your size can afford to have a data science team, can afford to spend in AI data science, right? But for small credit unions, right, who are sub 1 billion in assets, right? They can't really spend so much time, effort, or even plugging in fintechs. At the end of the day, they're not very inexpensive. They are expensive at times. So how do you think small credit unions should use the opportunity to leapfrog to the next step using data science and AI, knowing the fact that they don't have a huge amount of dollars in their kitty?
Yeah, it's all about prioritization. Even at our size, I talk about this a lot. I don't remember if this is going to be directionally correct. I don't remember specifically, but I think it's like JP Morgan Chase spends, I don't know, 10 billion or something a year on technology.
15 billion a year on technology.
15 billion a year. We don't have that. I mean, we're 11 billion in assets. And so what we need to do is prioritize, okay, what are the plays we're going to make? And the one thing that we can do better than JP Morgan Chase is we can be more nimble. And again, it's, everybody at the organization have that same purpose of making sure everything we're doing is a benefit to the member, is key. And so we have to prioritize. And I think to your question, it just continues on down the line. So if you're a $1 billion credit union, you don't have as many resources. And so you really need to be thoughtful and strategic on what plays are you going to do. And that means you can't do these 5 other ones that you want to do that are great ideas. But think about what's going to move the needle for your organization the most and do that first. And then once you make that venture into, say it's some AI capability that unlocks incredible efficiency, well, great. Then you have some more funds that you can use on some of those 5 things you said no to before. But you have to be thoughtful. You have to be strategic on how you prioritize those things and be really transparent, with your board and with your staff on that exact same thing.
Absolutely. I think that's a priority.
The one, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the one thing the smaller shops have even more than us, they're even more nimble than we are. So they don't have 950 employees. They have much smaller numbers. And so there's some strategic advantages there too.
In a sense, yes, true. I mean, it's more nimble, it's more quick to make it happen. But again, it's not an easy job for small credit unions to get things rolling. It's pretty difficult.
And you have to think about, there's incredible consolidation happening in the industry. I think that is going to continue. I believe that is going to continue. And so you do have to, weigh those options also. Could you join forces with another organization, whether it's, actually doing a merger, for the benefit of your members, to create that scale, or maybe it's partnering on some things, some technology solutions to kind of share the cost, so to speak. That gets a little tricky to do, but that's an option to consider also.
I mean, collaboration is the way forward. I mean, you cannot stop consolidation. That's the only way how the ecosystem will thrive. But yeah, that's a very good point. I think absolutely. I don't want to take a lot of your time. I respect your time. You're almost from, at the hour we thought about. I'll ask you one quick parting question, right? So what is the next big thing, do you think, across the credit union ecosystem, will be in the next couple of years or maybe the next decade? What is the next big thing? That's a difficult question.
That's a great question. The next big thing, I hope it is additional, back to that spirit of collaboration. I sit on the Circle Fund board, for instance, and I do that strategically because that's about, bringing innovation to credit unions, and it's a really great group of credit unions collaborating for that same purpose. I would say one thing is back to the AI and, data and efficiency space, something big and needle moving that would help all of us credit unions in a more collaborative way, that it's a plug and play type of solution in that space would be helpful. I also see a lot of the purchases of community banks happening. I think community banks are a bit challenged these days, especially if they have just larger commercial portfolios, not enough of a retail presence. And so I actually do think you're going to continue to see that as well. You see some community banks now getting into, more retail, and you're seeing credit unions get into more commercial. And so you're going to still, over the several 10 years, you're going to start to see even more of that. I don't know what it's going to look like, but that's going to change. And, we are the community institutions, no matter what the big banks try to say, and they're trying to get into our wheelhouse now and do some of the things that credit unions have. But we are local, and we are, embedded in those communities that we serve. And so continuing to not lose sight of that as we keep growing and consolidating is really critical. Otherwise, we are just going to turn into, smaller versions of the large banks, which is not what's best for our communities and for our members. So I hope that in the next decade, we really continue to double down on that. And there's more of that, maybe coexisting collaboration, across community banks and credit unions, we'll see, that comes with it to stand out and serve the marketplace in that way, because it's needed.
That even motivates me Kathy, to stick around the movement, because the only thing I know is data and data science is to build something earth-breaking, earth-shattering, and have all credit unions use it for growing, right, and competing against the larger players at the end of the day. I mean, it's not competing against each other, but competing against outside sources, because we need the movement to grow stronger. This was amazing. I mean, I would like to thank you, for spending this time with us. We really appreciate, and thank you again.